Do you wanna build a snowman? Yes, hello, we are filming a wrap-up in cosplay, pretty much just because we're already so late doing this anyway because I've been sick, so we're gonna do it now so that at least it gets done. And this just happens to be what I'm wearing, so we'll roll with it. I'm also not going to bother going to go get any books or anything off my shelves. A lot of what I read was from libraries anyway, and we're just going to sit here and talk about some things I read. Cool. Hi all, it's STAZIC, and today we are talking about the books that I read in the month of July. And yes, we're doing it as honor. In July, I participated in 3 different readathons. I participated in Book Junkie Trials, the Reading Rush, and medieval-a-thon. The one I was the most active in was definitely the Book Junkie Trials, so that's the list I'm gonna kind of go down to talk about what I read. Pretty much every single thing I read was involved in the Book Junkie Trials, and then I had crossovers with the other readathons as I went along. I read 17 things all up. Technically 16 books and 1 poem, I suppose, but we'll get to that. I'll link the information to the readathons down below if you want to know more about it. I talked about them briefly in my TBR, so yes. I finally found my list. So I used a spreadsheet this month to keep track of all my reading and the challenges that each book corresponded to. It was one actually made by Little Book Owl. I will try to remember to link that down below as well. It's been really helpful and I really liked it. Alright, so rather than chronologically or anything like that, I'm just going to go through them in the order that I've got them down here with the Book Junkie Trials challenges. Just because there's quite a lot of things, and that's probably just going to be the easiest way for me to do it. Is that my laptop? His name is Anakin, for obvious reasons. Yep. Is that my freckles? I like my freckles. Cool. Alright. If you're wondering about the cosplay further, this wig came in the mail this week, so that's why I had to try everything on. I've had the dress since last year. I used to be able to get away with wearing my natural hair with it, then I chopped it all off in December and dyed it multiple colours, so that's not really an option anymore. So for the Book Junkie Trials, for most of the map you could do it in any order that you wanted, but for your main quest line you had to do it in order. So the first 5 things I read in July were the Bard quest line for the Book Junkie Trials. So the first thing I read was for Elvengard. Is that right? Yeah, the Elvengard, where you had to read something to do with politics or war. For that I read Kingdom of Ash, the last book in the Throne of Glass series. I have a mixed relationship with the Throne of Glass series. I really enjoyed the first book, second book, third book was my absolute favourite book in the series and my favourite book I read the year I read that. Oh, sorry, still recovering from being sick. I enjoyed Queen of Shadows, but I had a lot of problems with it and where the series was going, and then the book after that I skim read half of it, and then it got to Kingdom of Ash here, and I basically just felt like I had to read it just to finish the series at this point, just to get it over with. So, I mean, I did definitely enjoy parts of it. It wasn't like a terrible book, but that's kind of my feelings with the Throne of Glass series. There was a lot that I, again, was basically skim reading because I did not give a damn. At this point in the series, I think the only thing I really cared about was Manon. And yeah, can't really say anything else about that book because it would be mega spoilery for anyone who hasn't finished the series and if you have any desire to. But yeah, I read it just to get the series over and done with, really. I'm done with Throne of Glass. I'm glad it's over at this point. They're my feelings. Cool. Next thing was On the Hello Isle. Had to read something that was horror or atmospheric. For this, I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. So this was the poem I read. The Raven's a very famous poem. How does it go? Quoth the Raven, nevermore. It's used in all kinds of pop culture and media. I know it's was definitely in a Halloween Simpsons episode. I don't even watch The Simpsons, but I've seen that episode. Yeah, very famous poem by a very famous horror author. It was a nice thing to read after Kingdom of Ash, because Kingdom of Ash is like a massive slog. I enjoyed it. I do like that kind of traditional poetry. But what more is there to say? Classic horror poem. Next thing was The Empty Barrel Inn, which was to read an indulgent read. For this, I decided to read a graphic novel that featured Harley Quinn. This is why it was my indulgent read. Harley Quinn is like my fave girl, so anything with her in it, I'm reading just because Harley's present, basically. And I read Suicide Squad Basilisk Rising, which is the second volume in that Suicide Squad run. I have to say, I don't know, I didn't really care about it either way. Having now read the second volume, I think I can say with certainty that I don't really care for the Suicide Squad comics. I don't really know what it is. Like, I don't find them bad, and there is lots of stuff going on. I just don't really care, I guess. I don't think I'll be picking up anymore, even if Harley is in there. Yeah. The next thing I had to read was Giant Squid, an intimidating read. For this, I picked Nevernight by J. Kristoff. Now, this was my intimidating read because, one, it's the first book in a series, and due to the fact that I had barely been doing any reading the past few years, starting a new series was kind of intimidating to me, and also the fact that Nevernight is a very kind of well-beloved series. It's got quite a bit of hype around it. I loved it though. So Nevernight is basically a girl wants to get revenge for the death of her parents, and so she signs up to an assassin academy. That's the general gist. I loved it a lot. I read it from the library and almost immediately went and bought my own copy of Nevernight and bought a copy of God's Grave. So it's probably my favorite book that I've read this year. It is definitely a new favorite. I actually want to reread it. Like, I almost immediately wanted to go back and reread it, and I never get that feeling with books, so that's really something. The last thing I had to read for the Bard quest line was The Booky Grail, which was the same book for everyone, unless you were mixing it up and didn't want to read it. But it was Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I listened to the BBC, what's it called? It was like a BBC full cast recording thing, so that was actually really enjoyable to listen to. I also really liked Stardust because it kind of feels like a traditional fairy tale, and I've always loved fairy tales. I grew up on fairy tales, so the fact that this had that feeling, I really enjoyed it. So I was off to a good start this month, basically. Liking lots of things I was reading. But basically it's about this, basically Stardust is about how do you even explain Stardust? I'm sure a lot of people have probably seen the movie at this point, but basically you've got kind of a few different storylines going on. You've got this storyline about a king who's died, and his sons are all kind of fighting to become the new king, and there's a storyline there. And then you've also got this young man who promises a woman that he is going to bring back a falling star for her, and if he does that, then she will agree to marry him. And they're kind of the main storylines that are going along, and basically, yeah, it feels like a fairy tale, and it's a good time. From here, I'm not going through what I read chronologically anymore, because that's not how they're listed. In fact, the next book I'm going to talk about, I think, was actually the last thing I read in the month. So bear that in mind. Crimson Peaks was to reread a favorite. I decided to read Twilight because this was also, because of the reading rush, one of the challenges for the reading rush was to read a book and watch the movie adaptation, so I was going to do that for reading rush. I read Twilight but never ended up watching it within that week. Yes, I read Twilight. I'm sure everyone knows what Twilight is at this point. Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. This was a book I really enjoyed as a teenager. I think I read it for the first time at 13 or 14, over 10 years ago now, since I'm 26. That's terrifying. And basically, I'm just left questioning the tastes of myself as a teenager because I did not enjoy this. Not only is it, problematic in a number of ways, I think, that's been discussed thousands of times at this point, but also just not that interesting. I mean, majority of the book is basically just Edward and Bella talking to each other, and I don't care about either of the characters. So reading a book about two people having conversations when you don't care about either of the people speaking, that's something. To be fair, I don't think I ever liked Edward, even as a teenager, so that's something at least. But yeah, I don't know why I liked this book so much. I'm kind of curious to read New Moon to see whether I'd like that slightly more, considering there's not as much of Edward. But I don't know. It was an experience. Let's just leave it at that. Oh, my voice at the moment. Horrible. Another challenge was Queendom Stone. Read something with royalty. For this, I've got The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a book that is well beloved and has been getting a lot of hype. Yeah. Unpopular opinion. I was very underwhelmed with this book. So, The Cruel Prince is about a few girls basically that are whisked into the fairy world as children because one of them is a fairy, and so they're whisked away by her father essentially, but the other two are her half sisters, and they're mortal and they're whisked into the Fey world, and things happen from there. I just didn't find this book particularly interesting for the most part. For most of the book, I was just sitting there going, why do people love this so much? There's like nothing much interesting happening. But then even when things were happening, like there'd be like murder and stuff going on, and I'd still just be like, I don't know. The very end of the book was kind of more interesting, but I feel like if it's only the end is interesting, like that's not enough to save a book overall. And also, I've also found, I think I like over-the-top writing styles. I think that's something I've kind of solidified this month as well, because I love Nevernight, and a lot of people who do complain about Nevernight, their main complaint is basically how flowery over-the-top the writing is, and I love it. So going back then to reading YA that's quite simplistic writing in a lot of ways, and that isn't over-the-top, I don't know. I'm not explaining myself well, but yeah, basically nothing in that book did it for me. I didn't think it was like an outright horrible book, but I definitely do not understand why it's like so up there for so many people. A lot of the times I read things and go, oh yeah, I can see why people like this so much, but I don't know, man. I don't know. Forgotten Forest had to read the next in the series. I read Now I Rise, which is the book by Kirsten White, this book that comes after And I Darken. What's the series called? The Conqueror's Saga or something? I picked this up on a whim because I saw it at my library, and I read And I Darken years ago. I had mixed feelings about that one. I decided to pick this up though. The series basically is a female retelling of Vlad the Impaler. Loosely, that's where it starts. And I enjoyed this book. It was interesting, particularly in that it wasn't a book heavily focused on romance. Was refreshing. I think that's one of the problems I had with the first book, is that it started very kind of gritty and then divulged into something else. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Can't say much about it. It was a sequel, but that is what it is. The Weeping Falls, a tearjerker. Now, I'm not someone who really cries in books or anything. What I put for this was actually a non-fiction book, which I have to explain why I've put it here. So I read Speaking Out by Tara Moss, which is basically her talking about how women can speak out in society and all of this kind of stuff. And I've put it as the tearjerker because, she talks not only does she talk kind of practically about how you can speak out, but she's also got the background info of kind of how women often aren't listened to and things that happen to women who try to speak out and all of this kind of stuff. And there were other topics touched on in there. And it was just, it's one of those things that even if you're well aware of it to begin with, it just kind of highlights how depressing many parts of the world can be and how depressing the world can be, particularly as a woman. So that's why I put it there. And yeah, I don't really know how I feel about this book. I don't know. It made me just feel crappy. It made me feel kind of crappy after reading it, even though it was overall kind of meant to be kind of a more uplifting call to power kind of book. I don't know. I don't know. But I read that and then decided to take a break from nonfiction for a while, basically. Alright, Dwarf Mount, A Hint of Romance. For this, I read The Wicked King by Holly Black. Now, you might be thinking, you didn't like The Cruel Prince. Why did you read The Wicked King? One, because it was easy to get at my library. But two, because I wanted to read it and see whether it would make me understand why people loved the series so much, I guess. I have to say I probably enjoyed it slightly more than The Cruel Prince, but I definitely still don't think it's anything special or particularly exciting. So that is what it is. That's how I feel about the series. Am I gonna read the next one? Who knows? I might do that to myself because I like to know what's going on. So considering how many people have been talking about this series, I didn't like not knowing what the hell they were talking about because I'd never read it. So I might just to be in the loop, even if I don't like the series that much, because I don't outright hate it. Like that would be something painful to do that would be something painful to do to myself if I really hated it. But I don't really hate it. I just feel kind of indifferent towards it. It's just meh to me, you know. Cool. Apothecary Towers, a random book. So some of the only things I actually had on my TBR for July was for the reading rush. I basically wanted to read all of my unread owned graphic novels. So for my random book, I randomly selected one out of my stack of graphic novels that I had. And the one that came up for that was The Wicked and the Divine. The Wicked and the Divine has a really interesting concept. It's about gods who are like reincarnated on Earth every, I can't remember how many years. Concept really interesting. The art is also beautiful. This is one of those cases where I should have gone and got it off my shelf because it's beautiful. But the story itself I felt very meh about it. I felt like it wasn't executed very well. I don't know what it was. Yeah. It's beautiful though. And because the concept's so interesting, I might still read some more in the series and see what they're like. But yeah, story-wise, I was not. I was a little underwhelmed. Yes, from that first volume. The Great Library has been on your TBR forever. Again, I read a graphic novel because most of those graphic novels had been sitting on my shelves for years. So for this I read Welcome to Gotham Academy, which was obviously set in Gotham, Batman universe. And I actually really enjoyed this. Again, art was beautiful. It's about these kids at this academy in Gotham, and there's kind of like a mystery element going on. It's kind of like mystery with like light horror themes. And it's just kind of adorable, and I like the vibes, and it was a good time. It was just a sweet good time. The next graphic novel I read was a new favorite. It might even be competing with Saga at this point. I don't know, I haven't read Saga for a while. I need to go back to that. But I loved this graphic novel. So it was for the Drowning Deep, rich world building. I read Monstrous. And I was not expecting how dark this graphic novel actually is. Like, it's bloody, it's got body horror, it's yeah, it's a time, and I loved it. I love weird, dark stuff. I went to swear then and then reconsidered it. Yeah, it's this world where there's basically like furry creatures, and there's human creatures, and then there's the creatures that are the offspring somewhere along the line of those two. And basically the humans hate anything that isn't human, and we're following this main character who is of that middle race, and she's got something dark attached to her, and there's all this stuff going on, and it's great. It's really dark and really weird, and I really like it. And the art, again, is one of the most magnificent things I've ever seen. I love it. I need to get my hands on the next volume. Yes. Okay, so for Alt Grove, I had to read something gory, gruesome, or gritty. For this I read The Ask and the Answer, which is the sequel to The Knife of Never Letting Go, Patrick Ness. This is, what genre is it? It's like dystopian, I guess. But the men of the world have noise, which is basically like their thoughts out loud and all of this kind of stuff. I can't actually remember enough about what happened in the first book to give a summary of that, and then I can't really give a summary of the second book. What I can say though is that I was initially listening to this book on audiobook, and I really was not enjoying it. If you've seen any of my vlog, you'll see that I've mentioned how audiobooks and I often don't really get along, and this was one of those cases of that where I didn't know whether I really disliked the... Excuse me while I fix myself. Where I wasn't enjoying it and I was considering stopping reading it, or I was going to rate it really low when I finished it, but I ended up putting the audiobook down and finishing and actually just reading the end of the book, and I'm really glad I did that because I enjoyed it a lot more when I stopped the audiobook. I don't know whether it just wasn't a great audiobook, whether I just don't mesh well with audiobooks, or what the story is. I know a lot of people listen to lots of audiobooks and I can't do it, but I enjoyed it a lot more once I did that. Not one of my favourite things ever, but I did enjoy it. I haven't been given star ratings for anything. I will try to remember at the end of this to go through and try to remember what I rated everything. Alright, Old Pirate Cove takes place on sea. For this I picked a book that has some sea travel in it and also has a battle sequence that's like on a synthetic sea, basically. So it counts, and for this I read God's Grave. Because as I mentioned, I went out and bought that once I finished Nevernight. And I will say I didn't enjoy this quite as much as Nevernight. Yeah, can't really say much about it if you don't want spoilers. I will just say that this involves kind of gladiator themes, because Nevernight is in this kind of Roman-inspired world, which is also a great thing as someone who studied classics. Didn't enjoy it as much, still really enjoyed it, and very excited to see where the series goes, because the last book is out really soon now, so I read this at a good time. For Glimmer, a beautiful or colourful book, I read or listened to Big Magic, because I was listening to a bunch of non-fiction books this month. And this is basically a book talking about like creative lifestyles and nurturing a creative lifestyle kind of thing. And it had some really interesting ideas, but there was also a lot that just did not gel well with me. As someone who is not very religious or spiritual in any ways, that's particularly where I kind of clashed with this book, because it talked a lot about kind of creativity and genius and inspiration and ideas as being kind of individual entities of their own that aren't connected to any one person, and they're kind of just like flying off doing their own thing, basically, was the idea behind that. So the spirituality of this book didn't really sit well with me, but there was some interesting stuff there. I just didn't agree with all of it. But, you know, it was still an interesting thing to listen to. Draconic Isle, something that features dragons. I read the Tea Dragon Society, which is adorable. A little graphic novel involving tiny little dragons that you can make tea from. They're like, because they've got like tea leaves on their head or something. I don't know. It was adorable, and I don't know what else to say about it. It's adorable and wholesome, and the characters are adorable, and the story is adorable, and it's just a good time. If you want something that's just a good time and it's gonna make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, that's what this graphic novel is. So that was great. Alright, I think that was everything. Just quickly, if you were interested, for medieval-a-thon, obviously I became royalty, I became a queen, even though I'm a princess at the moment. Should have been Elsa. But I became a queen because I read over 6 books, clearly. I got a crown because I read something where people were fighting for a kingdom, fighting for a throne, Kingdom of Ash. A shiny book, Now I Rise. So I got a breastplate. For Greaves, a thick paperback. God's Grave. Boots, yellowed pages was Twilight. Cloak, red on the cover. Suicide Squad Basilisk Rising. Daggers, book with assassins, Nevernight. Bow, a book with elves. I put The Wicked King, even though they're fae, they are referred to as elves at one point in that book, so that's why I counted that. Meh. Then for the Reading Rush week, I read 7 books and I completed all challenges, I think, except watching Twilight, even though I read it, just didn't watch it. Purple on the cover was Welcome to Gotham Academy. Read in the same spot, The Wicked King. I read the entire thing in my bed because I was sick. I've been sick a lot recently. It's great fun. Meant to read last year, Monstrous, because I bought Monstrous at Free Comic Book Day last year. Twilight was an author's first book. A non-human main character, The Wicked and the Divine. Really, most of the stuff I read that week. 5 or more words in title, The Ask and the Answer, and Read and Watch was meant to be Twilight. So, yes. They're the things I read this month. Cool. I feel like I barely explained anything, and we'll see how this turns out, but at least you get to look at my cute freckly face. That's all I can leave you with, really. I don't know what else you're here for. If it was quality book content, then you're in the wrong place, clearly, because I can't even be bothered getting up to go get my books off my shelves. Yeah. Just quickly, Kingdom of Ash. Actually, let's go to my Goodreads. We'll go to my Goodreads, see what I don't think I rated everything that I read this month, but the things I did rate, we'll see what I rated them. Because some people might be interested in that, I guess. Goodreads. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I've been really, really sick all week. For most of the week, I had no voice whatsoever. So now, I guess and because I've been homesick all week, I guess I'm just going loopy in the aftermath. If anyone's curious, I've also been listening to Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. And I've already read a couple of books this month. Alright, let's see. So Twilight, I rated 2 stars. And I question everything about my life now. The Wicked King, I gave 3 stars. Monstrous, 5 stars. Speaking Out, I didn't rate. The Wicked and the Divine, I didn't rate because I didn't really know how to rate it. Yeah. The Ask and the Answer, I gave 4 stars. Gotham Academy, I gave 4 stars. Big Magic, I gave 3 stars. God's Grave, 5 stars. Possibly more like a 4.5. Stardust, I gave 5 stars. Now I Rise, I gave 4 stars. The Cruel Prince is 3 stars on Goodreads, but I'd probably give it a 2.5. Nevernight, 5 stars. Kingdom of Ash, 3 stars. So yeah. If anyone's curious about how my ratings on Goodreads work, it's basically if I loved something and don't have problems with it, it's 5 stars. 4 stars of things that I really like but don't love. or I really liked it but don't think it's an objectively good book. Like, there are some kind of like smutty paranormal books I've rated 4 stars because I really enjoyed them but think they're kind of trash, but I love them anyway, you know. 3 stars are generally things I just feel really meh about, and then 2 stars things I don't like but don't necessarily think they're objectively awful. A 1 star would be something that I truly just think is awful. That's probably a general idea of how my ratings work, if you're curious. Cool. I think that's all I have to say. What else can I tell you? That's what I read this month. I don't think I have anything exciting going on this month. There's an anime convention coming up, but I don't know whether I'm going to it or not yet. Yeah. Cool. I guess I'll leave it there before I just awkward myself to death, and yeah, Stasi out. People are asking where you've been. They say have courage, and I'm trying to. I'm right out here for you. Just let me in. I cannot sing. When I've been sick.